about these Hearthstone cards for our pre-show. Okay, please continue with these weapons.
So anyway, like we were talking about before the show, bad paladin weapons. Ceremonial Maul Cog Hammer, Lightbringer's Hammer, which can't go face. That's the 3/2 lifesteal one.
Ooh.
We got Rallying Blade, giving Seed Cloud Buckler +1/+1 might actually make it worse. Underlight Angling Rod, that one's okay. Unidentified Maul, hey. Light Sorrow, Cavalry Horn, worse with +1/+1. Faraki Battle Axe, if you know what this card does, I'd be very impressed.
Overkill, +2/+2, +3/+3. Is it +3/+3?
Anything else? It does say Overkill.
It was like 5 mana. It was like a 3/3 maybe. I don't know.
Wow. Okay, I'm very impressed.
Did I get it?
You're pretty close. Minion in your hand, 2/2. That's what it does.
2/2.
But yeah,
okay.
5 mana, 3/3 on the money. Then we've got
I don't know why I remember that. Out of all the things I can remember, I don't remember most Hearthstone things.
No, but you got this one. Then Valinir, Vinecleaver, Libram of Judgment, and Silver Sword. So, if you're looking for that late game burn, maybe you're trying to whack a null, but it's not going to find it for you. And you're often going to end up with a Prismatic Jewel Kit and a Sword of the Fallen and be like, what was I thinking?
Vinecleaver would be pretty sweet though on like turn 8 or something. Or what's that one? Like you could be playing Flood Paladin, and I don't know how you discover a card that discovers, because you're not main decking that pretty much ever. But this crazy scenario where it finds like the Silver Sword, right?
Yeah,
and then holy shit, you just won.
If you can play the 8 mana 4/5 weapon, you're gaming. You spend 9 mana for it, maybe one of these days. I'm sure Flood Paladin really likes to be hanging out on turn 8. And
hey, listen, this is a hypothetical scenario where somehow you have that card to begin with, so I think all bets are off.
All right, let's stop talking about bad paladin weapons. We've gone too far. We have a schedule to keep. Let's go.
Gone too far. Or not far enough. No, I don't remember like any of those weapons, so I'm impressed that Ron even remembers some of them.
I mean, we went through all 26 though, or all 22 that aren't in standard.
Shit.
This card could pull.
Yeah, as soon as cards leave standard, my brain's like, don't need that information anymore, and then they're out of my head, like they're gone.
No longer exist.
Nope. They're gone.
It's really funny that like you look at that card, and if it just didn't say from the past, it'd probably be pretty good. You'd be pretty happy about it.
Nah. How many standard weapons are there for Paladin, Ron, if there are 22 from the past?
Very few, right? So it's a curated pool, so you can always get the lifesteal buff weapon?
Yeah. There's 4. You get it every time. It would be completely busted.
Well, yeah, it probably wouldn't be healthy.
No, it would be totally unfair.
It'd be really bad news. But it would be an actual good card if it didn't say from the past.
Yeah, that one would get banned, I think. That's an insta nerf.
Yeah, understandable.
Okay. Are we ready?
Let's do it.
Ready.
Right. Welcome to episode 52 of the TCCG Roundtable. We are your hosts, DragonRider, DankestDad, and RonMexico. How are you guys doing today?
Doing awesome.
Doing good.
It's the weekend. Let's go.
It is yet another Friday.
Amazing.
What are the odds?
Who could have guessed? We record on Fridays, and here we are on Friday again. There's some fun stuff to talk about today. There's some exciting Hearthstone news, and right around the corner, and a few other things. And I'm excited about our main topic too.
Yeah. Dankest has put together a beautiful show note list for us to reference for our topic. So very excited. Real quick before we jump into anything, do either of you have anything going on? I know in terms of like card game stuff. I still feel like we're slightly kind of in that dip, the kind of lull a little bit before things start to get released and come out over the next like couple weeks. But anything you got going on?
Yeah, I've been playing in my local championships for universes, having a bit of fun with that. I've also been playing tons of Star Wars Unlimited. Gonna hang out with the boys, play some tonight. It's gonna be great. I've been loving the card games I'm doing, and other than that, May 4th just happened recently between now and the last airing. So in a bit of celebration, Michelle acquired some nice Star Wars Legos. So we've got the Ghost and some Moss Espa stands and pod racers to assemble later this weekend. I'm over the moon.
Nice.
Well, that's exciting. That's awesome.
And fun Lego tidbit before we move on. I learned this when I was looking to see which Moss Espa set I had as a child, that the Moss Espa pod racers are actually the most redesigned Lego set. If you're looking for a Lego set on any one thing, the pod racers from Phantom Menace are the thing they've revisited more than any other. So little tidbit, if you are ever trying to learn more about Legos, you just find the weirdest things.
Now this is pod racing.
Yes.
I was thinking that exact same thing. Oh, love it. Yes.
I got nothing nearly as exciting going on. I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone and not really any other card games. I have been just outside of that. Also, different Michelle, my Michelle, has been very busy with work, but when she hasn't been, we've gotten to catch up on like a whole bunch of different anime, and like there were a few that just recently came back that we're really enjoying. So that's been fun. Yeah, Hearthstone is sort of like a waiting for the mini set type of period, but it's not too bad right now. The deck rouletting has been fun.
Nice. What are you guys watching?
The main thing, like our number one thing, is Reincarnated as a Slime. It's like one of my favorite animes ever. Really fun show.
Nice. I've not seen that one, but I might have to check it out.
Yeah. Well, I'm not doing anything.
You're weirded out by the
exciting.
name first, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard good stuff about it too, though. So I don't know. I thought the same thing. I was like, that sounds weird, but yeah, I've heard good.
We didn't get into it because of the name, probably for like a few months before we actually did, because we're like, man, that sounds really weird. But like, it's just like a cute little ball, like that transforms into other things. And, lots of other. I should try to explain an anime. It's yeah. No, we'll move on. I would recommend the show if you like anime. It's fun.
That works. I don't feel like I've been doing anything as exciting as either of you, and I have probably played less card games than almost ever before. I feel like the last like 2 weeks or something. Because school. And I was telling Dankest earlier, I was like, I did my first like term, which is for my online school. They're only 8 weeks long, and I was like, man, it was easy. I've always been good at school stuff, so I was like, whatever. Like I could procrastinate, I could do stuff last minute. I'll still do really well. And then this semester, I was like, yeah, like one class was part time. I was like, I can do 2, like piece of cake, right? And then I started these 2, and it was like first week, all of a sudden, it was like, okay, for each class, here's 2 chapters you have to read. Here's this graded assignment. You have to do your discussion. You have to do these replies. Your replies can't be on consecutive days, mate. And I was just like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of things going on. What? And then I was like, okay, it's fine. I'll just work through it. I'll start like earlier in the week. And then one of my classes is microeconomics. And to start, I know we've talked about math before. To start, I spent Monday for 4 hours doing math problems that were just refresher / practice things before I even started my reading and getting into what we were doing, because I needed to get the refresher on like the like math problems and like some algebra stuff. I don't even remember if it was like algebra and like plotting on graphs and working on slopes on stuff. I was like, oh my God.
It sounds painful.
It was. By the end of it, I was crying and I was frustrated. I was like, I just want to be done with this. I hate this. I'm so bad at this and I feel dumb. And I was like, I'm just over it.
That is the acceptable response. Yeah.
Yeah. But I finished and, and then it was actually fine because all of the problem, like it was practice anyway, so it's not like it was going to hit my grade, but it was each problem, they give you like 3 attempts to even get the points on it. And, so it was totally fine. But yeah, I was like, oh no. Like, here I was starting like, this is going to be so easy. Let's do these classes. And then it was like very first day of classes. And that was my experience. It was like, if you've seen that little meme where like the little toddler starts running into the room from the hallway in like his diaper and shirt, and then he's like, and then like turns around and runs back. Like that's how I felt. That's this is gonna be easy. Okay, run away. Don't like this. So yeah, the card games have been slightly lacking for me lately, but honestly, this is probably a good time. As I've said, we're still kind of in that little bit of like lull before things start coming out. So let's start talking about the things that are coming soon. Ron, you want to kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Hearthstone news, the mini set got announced, and that will be releasing on Tuesday, May 14th. The title of it is Dr. Boom's Incredible Inventions. Devs posted recently that they cut off the last part of it because they thought it would be too long, but it was originally intended to be Dr. Boom's Incredible Inventions of Fun. Now the of fun has been removed. Does that mean the fun has been removed from the mini set? I don't know. Probably not.
Maybe.
Hopefully not. We'll see.
Maybe. You never know.
Maybe. But yeah, that's going to be the official title, is Dr. Boom's Incredible Inventions. And there is a new mechanic that is getting introduced called Gigantify, which is just like miniaturize, but the opposite of it. So instead of miniaturize, for those familiar with the keyword from the most recent expansion, where you would get a 1 mana 1/1 copy of the minion that you played, now you get a 8 mana 8/8 copy of said card that you played if it has the Gigantify keyword. So obviously it has very different applications. Instead of maybe like strong battle cry effects that you want to repeat for very cheap, it's strong keyword effects that you want to have on a much larger minion. That should be kind of interesting to see how it goes out. And then there are also a few other mechanics, I guess, that are being introduced. Not exactly like keyword stuff, but there's like a theme with packs. So we have a bunch of 1 mana cards for each class with a different type of pack. And basically it will add 5 random cards from something into your hand, and at the end of your turn you discard them. So for Hunter it's Beasts, for Warrior it's Taunts, for Rogue it's from other classes, and so on. I don't know, looks like it probably won't be very good, but maybe it will create some fun fireworks and highlight clips for people. Doesn't look like it'll enter the competitive realm too much. And then just, a whole bunch of other cards that will wind up being released, 30 or 40 altogether, I think, to shake up the meta in Standard.
I think it's 38 cards. So yeah, that'll be available Tuesday. I feel like we have a larger Hearthstone audience, so just a reminder, you can get that if you want to open those cards. They do always have the mini set cards available to open from the previous expansion packs. So if you have packs from Whizbang's Workshop, you can hold on to those and then open those once the mini set launches, or you can buy just all of those cards for $14.99 US, or for 2,000 in-game gold, which is usually how a lot of people do it. I think that's my preferred method, which is great. Mm-hmm. But just a couple other mentions, I think, for sets, because we are now May 10th today. So later this month, we have the Flesh and Blood Part the Mistveil set coming out on May 31st. We also have the Disney Lorcana 4th set, Ursula's Return, that is going to be at local retailers on March 17th. That's a week from today. And then in like wide, retail on May 31st. And then we are in kind of the middle of the Star Wars Unlimited like preview reveals, I guess, for Shadows of the Galaxy, which isn't coming until July 12th, but we've been getting more consistent cards being shown for that. So that's definitely exciting. So I feel like by the time we're getting to like the end of this month, it'll be like, okay, now all these things are coming out. We can actually like be playing with these cards and talking more about these sets for these different games. So, Dankest, do you have anything else for news?
Not too much else to focus on. This week would have been the release of Universe's Girl Power set, the return to My Hero Academia. But it will be next week now. So you all dodged the Mother's Day pre-release, everybody. You're safe. Next week, though, get ready to sling some cards. I know that's where I'll be.
Sweet.
All right. So for our topic today, we're going to be discussing interactions, interruptions, and ingenuity. So this is one that I thought would be cool to talk about after, messaging some locals from my own Star Wars scene in the Discord where, they were talking about how glad they are that there's no counter spells in the game or anything like that. And, I think it's definitely something us card gamers have a love-hate relationship with. And, maybe you play a game like Pokemon where you can do what I'm doing and just go on uninterrupted, completing your turn and, only have to worry about what people do when it's their turn. Or you can be playing a game on the other end of the spectrum like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic where nothing is safe, nothing is sacred, and you're just at the mercy of your opponent's whim to say, I'll allow it. So, all right, just before we get started, do you guys have anything you want to share about any of this?
Nope, just dive right into it.
Cool. Done?
No, I mean, I think this is a fantastic topic, and I'm very curious to talk about
That's
this.
great. Okay, yeah, let's move on.
Yep.
So, for interaction, the most common examples that we think of in card games are the ways that you mess with your opponent. So the classic is always removal. You got a Doomblade, you've got a Fireball, you've got a Dark Hole. You have something that is going to get rid of your opponent's stuff, and boy, does that feel good or bad, depending on which end of it you're on. There's also the counters. Hearthstone players, I know Counterspell and Objection are your absolute favorites. Those are the things that get the blood flowing. But, you have your trap cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Good old Magic Jammer if you're old school. Your Solemn Judgments, your Counterspells and Force of Wills in Magic, and Deny and Legends of Runeterra. There are so many of these, and they're a kind of core part of card games, but often very polarizing. And I think this is the real card type that people dislike. Otherwise,
and now Dankest just triggered my trap. Speaking of removals, I think we're going to remove some of what he's talking about in the editing. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that. That's too much
She
work.
already did it. It's too late.
It's too late. No, okay. We had this thing before we started recording when before John oh my god, I can't talk today. Before
I have
Ron
a real name.
joined us, I just like combined all the words. Yeah, you know what? Just oh, good lord. Interactions. Good thing we don't need to talk while we're interacting here. Oh, I was gonna say we were talking about interruptions. We were like, we should just interrupt each other the whole time. Well,
I liked it.
Oh, it was fantastic. Okay, so yes, please continue.
So removals and counters, those are the big bucket. But outside of that, there are lots of other ways that you can interact in games. There are combat tricks. There are things that disrupt the hand. Another one that I know Hearthstone players really love much more than everyone else in other games. That's a fan favorite. There are cards that disrupt the deck, disrupt the discard pile or graveyard. There are cards that affect stats on the board and passive effects that make your opponent's turn more difficult. Interaction can come in a lot of other forms as well, and we'll cover that a bit later. The last bit before we just go into the games is, when does it happen? And, there's some that you do on your own turn, some on your opponent's turn, some that happens kind of in between, and some timing that is harder to fit into those larger buckets. And you might be thinking, wait, what? Your turn, their turn? How are there other times? And, well, card games are tough. We got a lot of rules in them. And, sometimes even the structure of a turn doesn't really hold true in games like Star Wars Unlimited and Legends of Runeterra. And that's where it can get murky.
Well, and I think it's important for games, especially like you're mentioning some of these, like I think some of the newer games too are also really trying to kind of come up with their own spin on card games, right? And they're trying to take, a lot of these topics that we talk about, you're saying like, oh, like Hearthstone players really don't like this aspect, or they love this, no, sarcastically love it. But people who are making new card games also hear that feedback from other card game communities. And so then they try to think of, well, how can we change our game to maybe eliminate those kind of interactions that people don't like? And so then you start getting these like variations on these different games. Plus they have to do something to like make their game stand out and be different than other card games. So it's really kind of interesting because there is such variation between these across all of the different card games. And it doesn't matter whether it's a digital card game or a physical card game. Like they all have their own styles. So kind of interesting.
Absolutely. And, the style that's the most simple is the easiest. You just don't do anything on your opponent's turn. You are hanging out, having a nice time, and figuring out what you can do on your turn to get your plan going, make their life a little harder while reacting to their plan. So Pokemon and Lorcana are the two games that I think primarily come to mind when I think of this style. And, the question is, how do you interact? Are two people playing solitaire? Are they just racing? And the answer is no. There are things that you can do. So for Lorcana, for example, you can disrupt their strategy with cards like Emerald. You can make them discard things. You can make them put things back in their hand. And, Pokemon, game I've played much more, has a lot more examples. Like in modern Pokemon, there's Pokemon powers and effects like stadiums that have a static effect that makes it so your opponent has to play through them. Like very famously, when I was still playing, back in my day, we had Seismitoad EX that had a Quaking Fist that would make it so that your opponent couldn't play tool cards. And while, you weren't actually on their turn telling them no, your opponent had to respect that they can't use tools anymore and had to come up with a strategy to get rid of Seismitoad so they can use their tools and win. And if we're going even further back past my day, energy removal is one of the most powerful cards in the original Pokemon release. And that and super energy removal, it's sort of big brother. We're both taking energy off your opponent's Pokemon, slowing down their game plan, and bringing the game kind of screeching to a halt. And maybe those were a little too powerful, but, you still can do something on your turn that makes your opponent kind of consider their opponent in trying to execute their strategy. And, I'll let Ron take this one. We're going into the realm of Hearthstone. So this is sort of the next level up. And, I have some notes, but, this, I think, the best of any of us. So how are we interacting in Hearthstone?
There's plenty of different ways, even though Hearthstone is another game where on your opponent's turn, you do sit there and do nothing. until their turn ends. But you have your turn, obviously, to try to find ways to either put your opponent into a position where they have to respond to what you're doing, or you can make defensive plays. Even something as simple as playing a minion that says taunt means they can't just kill you until they respect the taunt first. And then there's other more interesting, like, different levels of interactions. There's secrets, depending on the type of class that you play, that have interactions that actually trigger on your opponent's turn when they do something specific to trigger said card. There are cards like the much beloved Dirty Rat that can pull a card from your opponent's hand, a minion from your opponent's hand, onto the board frequently. There are many win conditions in a single card as far as like minions are concerned, where an entire deck might be built around a single card. Things like Bran and Sif come to mind as like easy examples of, hey, your whole deck revolves around this thing, so if I take that thing away from you before you do your whole game plan, then your game plan is shot to hell. That kind of stuff. And then just in general in Hearthstone, you do have, of course, your opponent's turn to think about what you're going to do on your next turn. Or if you're anything like me, it's like the monkey banging cymbals together, just it going on in my head during their entire turn. just screeching insanity with no thoughts until my turn starts. I'm like, oh god, what do I do now?
Wait, that's the best time to interact with Twitch chat too. Like, okay, it's my opponent's turn. Like, I'm just gonna talk to the people that are hanging out in my
Twitch
stream,
chat,
and
like... then all of a sudden it's your turn again. You look back and you're like, whoa,
what'd they do?
This is a really bad situation. Didn't look nearly this bad last time I looked. But yeah, it's kind of cool just how many different things there are. I just kind of hit like the tip of the iceberg of like effects in Hearthstone, because there are specific cards that might make your opponent's cards cost more or deny a certain effect, like Dankest was talking about, where you can't play your tools in this other game. Well, it isn't necessarily that exact same thing, but there are plenty of cards that kind of have a disruption style effect attached to them. Things like Cult Neophyte or Speaker Stomper or other easy examples where it's like, now your opponent's spells cost more on their turn. So there's lots of different ways that you can, especially knowing the game well enough, you can predict the turn that's going to happen, where they might play one of their more powerful cards for this specific cost, and you can do a thing that disrupts that turn from happening by making that thing cost more, as an example.
Yes. And, like, I think, like, also we're getting a new card. Very rarely in Hearthstone, we do have the opportunity to do something on our opponent's turn. It doesn't happen much, and Nathria was the first time we saw it, but Pro Gamer, it's coming to Hearthstone now, and we get a chance to literally play some rock, paper, scissors.
We finally have a rock, paper, scissors meta for real.
But it won't, you still don't interact on your opponent's turn. Like, they'll play that, they'll pick their option, and then as soon as your turn starts, you'll pick your option. So it's still not like technically interacting during the turn, but it is a different interaction and like a different way that you're still kind of interacting with your opponent because of making that choice and playing rock, paper, scissors against whatever they picked for their choice. So yeah, like it's just like a different effect and a different way to interact with them, which is really interesting. And you mentioned the like love hate. I feel like the comments I saw on social media about that card really showcased that love hate. Some people were like, this is the greatest card ever. Like, this is so fun. And then some people were like, this is the most Hearthstone card that Hearthstone's ever Hearthstoned. They were like, whatever, like, it's so terrible. And it's like, okay, like, you have both ends of the opinions there, which was kind of interesting to see.
Yeah. I kind of have like the complete middle of the road take on that card, where it's like, okay, doesn't matter. We won't see play. Not relevant. Not actually worth running in any deck, but it's interesting, I guess. Whatever.
Yeah, I think I'm a big hater on the record, mostly just because I think the effect is like a little strange. But I can promise you, whoever my THL opponent is that week, I'm gonna be. Oh wait, it's you, Ron? Crazy. Anyway, I'm gonna be rolling up with Gamer Rogue, where I'm gonna try to play Pro Gamer as many times as possible in one turn, and then try to basically just time warp you.
Surely Rock will work again here. Okay,
well,
Rock.
No.
I pick Rock.
It's a Hearthstone card. The animation could take very long. Like, what if I'm able to trigger the battle cry like 21 times? Do you even get a turn? Is one of us gonna mill? What happens?
Actually, unfortunately, I found out how that interaction works already. Somebody posted it on Twitter, and it doesn't work the way that you think it will. The card has to be on the board for its effect to work.
Yes.
So if you play it, step it, play it, even on the same turn, it's only going to be one triggered effect, not multiple.
Yeah.
Okay, you're playing
Unlucky.
7. We're playing 7. I guess
this is so funny because I love that we have all these like varying opinions and like insights, because I love this card and I'm like, I want to play like a tavern brawl where literally your deck is just pro gamers and then like maybe a couple other cards that like you pick, so that you could play like 2 or 3 of them all out in the same turn or something, but like basically
doesn't that turn into a fatigue fight where now you want to get it wrong instead of get it right? Oh my god.
It would be hilarious. Like, you just pick a couple of cards to like go in this deck with a bunch of pro gamers, and then you just play rock, paper, scissors a bunch, and then yeah, like I think that would be hilarious and fun, and I'm like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I love this card. Yeah, we're all kind of in different points of liking the card or not.
So I'm trying to think though, in standard, how much is the most pro gaming you can do? And I think theoretically I can still get you to 21 with Shaman.
Nice.
Right? Triple battle cry will still stick, won't it?
That should work. Yes. A shutter block on the pro gamer. Now you're thinking.
Pro gaming.
So we've got some serious interaction there, in that I don't really know how relevant it is to the game, but technically I guess it could. I mean, you get all of them right or all of them wrong or anywhere in between. It's anywhere from like draw 2 to draw 6 or something for your opponent. Yeah,
and on the bright side too, like, God, that could be just something that could like ruin the game in terms of animations, but they'll make it snappy if that's the case, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So there's our Hearthstone interaction, but now we're pivoting a bit. We're going to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic. So all the concepts above apply. Every sort of form of interaction that's in Hearthstone, Pokemon, and Lorcana pretty much exists in Magic. Magic's, kind of the granddaddy of them all for card games, and they keep coming up with new stuff, and they've done almost everything everyone else has. But, Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! Also have this concept of speed in terms of playing spells and the stack or chains. So, like Don said earlier, you've activated my trap card, classic example you'd think of, but there's also quick play spells and quick effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! And instant and activated abilities in Magic. And those can respond to several game actions the opponent can do, which means that nothing is safe. So a lot of people will shortcut things and, just play out their games. But technically speaking, anytime you do anything, play a card, change phases, make an attack, deal damage, your opponent has the option to say, but wait, and play one of these abilities that has the appropriate timing. So this can, lead to a lot of sort of complex strategization and interaction that's very cool, where you can do something, bait an action from your opponent, but have your own sort of reaction to that. And I'm skipping ahead a little, but playing Legends of Runeterra, deny was so powerful, not because you were stopping your opponent's proactive plays, but because when you made your attack, you would be able to protect it from their disruption with a counterspell. And that's pretty sick. So, a lot of times these take mana or resources, so you can look over on the opponent's side. If you're in Magic, see 2 blues, see a trap card in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game and be like, okay, well, I know what they could have. Let's plan. But some of them don't. Like Force of Will lots of quick play effects and quick effects. Hand traps are the famous Yu-Gi-Oh example. Exists where you can't really know that they're there. And those cards are probably the most polarizing. And I know that from my own card gaming peers, those ones are the true love it or hate it.
Yeah. This one to me, like these are the most interesting that have changed or created differences, I would say, between the physical card games and digital card game spaces. Because as you mentioned, like Magic was kind of one of like the first card game that really kind of started all of this, right? And or at least the most popular one that really kind of got all of this into people's, into people's hands. And then that was something that I think people were pretty used to early on in terms of interacting like with your opponent that you're sitting across from physically, like you're sitting right there with your opponent. And it was much easier, I think, for people to be like, okay, I'm going to play this. And then they can look at their hand and say, oh, okay, well, no, I'm going to stop that. Or no, I'm going to play this thing. But then kind of how, MTGA and even like Legends of Runeterra, as you mentioned, I know that's slightly jumping ahead a little bit too, but, how those games incorporated that into their digital versions with kind of just saying, okay, now your opponent has a turn to, or, a little timer response. But then also there's like, you get into these even like more advanced, I would say, like little nuances of, oh, but do I want to change the setting to make it so that if I don't have the mana or the resource to even react to what my opponent just did, it automatically just passes right back to them. But then some people say, no, you don't want to have that setting on, right? Because there's that strategy of like, maybe it makes your opponent think that you might have something and you decided not to play it at that point. Maybe you're saving it for like their next thing that they do. And so there's even strategy in that changed because of this, which I find that so interesting that these concepts also changed and then kind of created other adaptations for card games because of this like development of the digital card game and how those have worked. So
absolutely. And like I know that for digital too, it's so important to have the player be active as much as possible. And like I know that that's one of the sources of tension is like people hate having to sit and watch your opponent take a whole long turn and then try to be on, say, okay. And imagining playing a Hearthstone game where your opponent has a deck like Nature Shaman or Garrote Rogue. And I don't think the Nature Shaman player or their opponent would have very much fun if your opponent says, I play Lightning Reflexes. You good? I picked a card. All right. I play Lightning Bolt. Okay. It would.
Yeah, and you have to like approve it every time. You're like, yes, go.
Yeah. Or Naga Mage.
Yeah.
When that was a thing. Oh my God.
It would get out of hand pretty quickly. So, I think that, the developers with Blizzard did a good job being like, okay, like these are the experiences we want to create for our players. Let's sort of keep things separate. And, back to the tabletop realm again, like I think that, from what I have found, like there's sort of the two like axes of interaction are, does it take a proportionate amount of resources to do? Like, is it somewhat telegraphed? Can you play around it? And versus, is it actually efficient or good? Like, is it worth it? Is it suboptimal? And, when you have both those things, like when it's very powerful in terms of, the mana to affect, and it, is hard for your opponent to predict, boy, like those cards are just rough to play through. And if you're new to the game, it feels like such a gotcha and it's such a tough moment to do your cool thing and then have some heartless jerk like me take it away from them. It's just not...
And then you uninstall or stop playing altogether.
Like, uninstall the physical game, blindfold yourself and leave the store. It gets there. So for our last one, but now that we've gotten through those, you could think what levels past Magic? Well, I think Legends of Runeterra, Star Wars Unlimited, and Rest in Peace Artifact were maybe the next, step past this in the system. So, Don, why don't you tell us about those?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's kind of the next step where it's kind of interacting, but instead of you taking a whole turn and being able to interact in between actions of, like where your opponent getting to the option to interact between your actions, they just don't have like a turn. Like each player doesn't have a whole turn per se. What instead is there's kind of phases, right? So it's like, okay, here's this phase of the cycle, or here's this part of the game where you each kind of alternate taking actions. So there is a level of interaction where you can say, okay, to start, if I'm going first, because these systems work on like an initiative type of system, who has the initiative to go first or second in that phase or that cycle of the game. So if I'm going first, then I can say, cool, I'm going to put this unit out onto the board or this creature out onto the board. And then your opponent now gets to take an action. And maybe that action is them playing something onto their side of the board, to have it in Legends of Runeterra's case, or maybe even some Star Wars. They want that thing on the board to be able to use it as a blocker. You don't get to pick blockers in Star Wars, but maybe now it's something that you might want to attack into that thing instead, for Star Wars. And so it alternates how you're interacting in terms of there's a lot more back and forth. You're both very actively involved. There's not really any kind of waiting around for your opponent to finish doing stuff like there is in like Hearthstone or Lorcana. And I find it so interesting, again, these like how they're similar but different, right? Like they both kind of have this alternating actions type of system. But again, like Legends of Runeterra has that mixed with the like declaring blockers like Magic does. But Star Wars goes the other direction of you get to pick which thing you're attacking into, like you would in Hearthstone or Lorcana. So even though they still have those systems, they kind of went different routes that way. So it's interesting because it requires a lot more, I would say, like focus and paying attention to what your opponent is doing and trying to strategize on how you want to do things, like what order you want to do things in. And again, as Dankest kind of mentioned earlier, like recognizing maybe what your opponent might want to do. And does that mean that you should hold back resources to potentially play something that might counter what they're going to do or stop what they're going to do or alter those decisions? And there is a note here that Runeterra also uses a stack mechanic like Magic does. So again, I think that's also part of the being able to kind of use that system more effectively with the alternating things in like the digital space. I think it's used very well in Legends of Runeterra, where it's like, okay, now it kind of pops up and you can pick back and forth. Yeah, okay, I'll approve that or not. Or maybe they're about to buff one of their things with a slow spell, and then you can say, oh, but I'm going to have this spell now that is actually going to deal damage to the thing you have on board. And then just like Magic, it will resolve kind of backwards. So your damage would be dealt first, and then maybe their thing dies, and now that buff has nothing to buff because the thing's dead. So Star Wars doesn't have anything like that. It's just the back and forth. So I guess in terms of that, you could kind of say it's a little bit more like each action is just like a mini turn, kind of like you would say in like Hearthstone or Lorcana. So it's like micro turns, I get, like kind of like we talked about, like those micro decisions. And I think one thing that's also very important for both of these games is talking about how the initiative works, because in Legends of Runeterra, there are some things that you can do that will like give you initiative back or allow you to basically have two attack phases in the same turn. Because again, that system, that like attack system, combat system works just like Magic, where you have one attack phase and you can attack with however many of your things you have as you want, and then your opponent blocks. Star Wars, it's literally single action. You pick this unit is going to attack into that unit. That's the action. And so Star Wars uses the kind of system of, as an action on your turn, you can take the initiative token so that you will start the next phase with initiative and you will go first. But that ends any future actions during that phase. So it kind of essentially will, quote unquote, like end your turn, right? Like, okay, if I take the initiative token, it's ending my turn. So you can't do anything else. And then at that point, it becomes much more like Hearthstone or Lorcana, where maybe your opponent still has multiple things that they can do. And then you kind of just get to watch your opponent do stuff at that point, if you take the initiative kind of early. So, but there is strategy then that involves on that. And so just kind of looking at like how they both kind of use that initiative system, but because of the ways that their other systems like combat systems and stuff work, they kind of have it very differently. Legends of Runeterra is just automatically like back and forth. This round, this phase, you'll have initiative first. Next one, I'll have initiative first, and back and forth.
Yes.
Like really clever design to me. It's like they built in a way to enable the types of disruption effects that can really frustrate people, but in hiding it in such a way that it doesn't feel as disruptive or feel bad moment type of thing as it did in other games. So I'm pretty impressed by it.
Exactly. And like I can say, like personally, like it's not as dramatic, but I feel like in part like this is almost like the shift in 2D from 3D to 3D for video games. Not like that it's so revolutionary, but because it's literally just another dimension added to the problem.
Yeah.
So, you know, before we had resources to hand the board, and then action economy is tacked onto it as well, and sort of priority. So there's this fourth game state factor, you know, fourth dimension, if you would, that card game players have to think about. And, you know, you can interact in Star Wars by just saying pass. You don't even have to play a card or do anything. And, you know, like I had my locals on Tuesday, and against one of my opponents, I had a situation where I just said pass on a turn where I was ahead on resources, but theoretically could still do things. And, you know, he said he hadn't seen that sort of thing before. So, you know, like as the community evolves and learns, you know, I'm not special for doing that. It's, you know, something that was pretty common in Legends of Runeterra and Artifact, but people will engage more with the system, learn it, and I hope learn to love it. But definitely is a sort of a cool evolution of the sort of game style. So now that we've made it through that whole laundry list, you know, I want to ask you guys, like, what do you think about, you know, interaction? Are you frustrated? Love it? Laugh, cry, pulling your hair out, everything? Like, where do you land?
It's a hard question to answer because it's a love-hate relationship. I think there's also different ways that it's expressed and ways that feel like this is good interaction and this is bad interaction. Everyone has their own relationship and interpretation of how that works too, and how they enjoy the game. And a way that I enjoy the game that I play might not necessarily be the same way that someone else does. And that doesn't make my way any more or less valid than theirs. But there are certainly things that I like hate with a passion as far as like elements of interaction or disruption. And there are other things that I absolutely love. And am like, I'm so glad that this exists. So something like Dirty Rat in general in Hearthstone is something that I've often been very unhappy with. It's just a frustrating thing to face, especially if its effect can get doubled or something, and all of your cool plans that you have are shot to hell because your opponent is, you know, basically playing a strategy that says, my way of winning is to make you hate your life. That kind of stuff I dislike. And then there are other types of disruption that I really, really love, where essentially like the things that I like are proactive styles and ways where, naturally my deck would be a little bit more aggressive. And I want to make something that is threatening and not have it get completely wiped out, where, I've basically spent, 4 or 5 turns trying to build up to this one threatening point and not have it all wiped out by like a singular effect from my opponent. So disruption cards like Cult Neophyte or Speaker Stopper are things that I've really, really enjoyed a lot of the time as a way to prevent my opponent from doing something that disrupts my plan. Even though the card itself is a disruption card, it's used in the way that you described, Deny in Lorcana, where it's like, well, I'm not actually using this counter spell that I would normally kind of hate as a card in order to disrupt, but in order to protect myself from being disrupted. That's the kind of interaction card that I like the most, but it's very much a love-hate relationship, because it's not like these things can exist in a vacuum independently of each other. They all need to be a part of the game to their own extent, and different people enjoy the game in different ways, and it's what adds to the complexity of the game. Nothing's perfect, but there's ways that you just formulate your strategies around the different options that are available, and it creates that kind of complexity and flexibility that we all mostly, I think, enjoy about our games.
Definitely. And Tito and Kapalua in the chat are having some good discussion, and that makes me realize I think I did miss one thing on Hearthstone. And this is part of why I think the Hearthstone interaction is so much more frustrating than in other games. So Hearthstone does not have resilient strategies. So you have a deck with 30 cards, and a lot of them are based around a copy of a legendary that you can only play one of in your deck. So if you're Sith Mage and you lose your Sith to Dirty Rat, your life sucks. It's over. If you lose your Bran and Bran Warrior, your life sucks. It's over. Like, these things are really hard to overcome. And your strategy that revolves so heavily around that one card can't win without it. And this is just not the case in other games. You can play multiple of your combo pieces. You can go off to combo in different ways. And you're not completely crippled if you lose one important card, but you're slowed down. And in Magic the Gathering, there's a card, Thoughtseize. So it lets you look at their hand, take a non-land card away from it, and discard it, and then you lose 2 health. That card is incredible in Magic. And, we saw how frustrating that effect was essentially for 6 mana in Hearthstone on Theatar. And they even get a card back to boot. And Thoughtseize is a card that some Magic players don't like, but it does not have near the same level of notoriety as some of these other pieces of interaction like Counterspell. And, maybe making like win conditions in Hearthstone be based more around epics than legendaries, having ways to eventually get pieces back or other design like that could be a way to go that makes something like Dirty Rat inherently less frustrating, where instead of saying my game is over, you have to say, okay, I now need to survive a couple more turns. I need to come up with a new plan instead of just feeling pure despair.
I think you seized on something that we may have discussed already on this show before, which was just an overall potential problem with Hearthstone's design philosophy, at least in like recent expansions, which is very much more centered on like, I have this one insane card. I have this one really strong thing, and I'm trying to do that one thing. So disruption means if you disrupt that one thing, everything is ruined. And if there's just less of, hey, everything's built around this. If we could have maybe 3 or 4 different win conditions that make up a deck that make a more viable strategy, rather than, well, the deck's built around this one thing because nothing's nearly as good as this one thing could ever possibly be, as far as like stuff that's available for me to do, then we might have a little bit of a better approach to the game. But that's a different conversation, not quite so much into interactions and interruptions and such.
Yeah. And like Tito again, now talking about Reno there. And, you know, like I think that sometimes, you know, expensive cards, especially that have come with a high opportunity cost, you know, I think they really want Reno to say win the game most of the time when you play it.
Yes.
And, you know,
which kind of sucks when your opponent plays Reno.
And intrinsically, that's a tough one to get around. But, you know, like, once again, I feel like maybe if those effects weren't so special or so unique, it would be one thing. But, like, if you're playing that deck of singletons that wants to get to turn 9 to do its powerful thing and it gets to turn 9, well, you know, maybe they could make some ways that you could kind of deal with it. Tito then says bait it out. Like, that could be a pretty good concept. Like, maybe there's something you can do to punish or come back with, but it's a tough balancing act, and different players like different things. And I can at least appreciate that Blizzard has tried in a lot of ways to make Reno satisfying to as much of the player base as possible. Are we the ones who are satisfied? We'll tell you later. But, you know, I think that they're doing a good job in their role.
Yeah, I think this is also really interesting, like talking about Hearthstone specifically and like talking about, a specific legendary or, you know, those types of strategies is that, yeah, they are more flaky, I would say, right? Like if your opponent does get rid of that Sif or that Bran, or somehow you end up burning your Reno, does that mean your game plan is over? That sucks. That feels so bad. But also I think just the design of the game as a whole kind of contributes to that almost having to be the case, because like you said, it's only 30 cards. A lot of the other card games are 50 card decks or 60 card decks. And then also you have to consider that a lot of those games that have the bigger decks, it's generally not as consistent with draws and stuff, because you have things like in Magic, you have to put your lands in the deck, right? So then you start to see designs in those type of games where you have more draw effects or tutor effects to pull specific things. And if you get to a point where, you know, if that deck were reliant on one card, that would feel absolutely terrible, because you would find it even less often and you wouldn't be able to do your thing. So they need a little bit more of that kind of interaction in terms of like the deck building and like how the game plays to be able to get to those. But I feel like we've seen what Ron was saying in Hearthstone before, where there have been decks that do feel like they have 3 or even 4 like ways to win. And those decks usually also people hate because they're just too good, right? It's like, oh, cool. That my opponent just cleared my board and now they're developing and they get to draw cards and they get to do this and they get to kill me. Like, so you also can't have decks that do too many win conditions, because then you're going kind of the opposite direction. So it feels like, at least from my perspective, I think because like I feel like the just base mechanics of the game and like the deck sizes, you're consistently getting the mana every single turn, no matter what you're doing, right? And you have the smaller deck size, which I feel like just leads to generally more consistent gameplay than other card games. I could be way off, but that's just my that's kind of how I feel there. So balancing
the only
feels
solution,
harder.
yeah. So the only solution must be to move back up to 40 cards, like Renathal, the least divisive card in Hearthstone's history, right?
You know, I will say, almost every card that has said start of the game has been very broken in some way. Renathal being the exception, because it doesn't say start of game on it. whoever does the templating at Blizzard, it makes me so mad. Why aren't they all the same? But
They could never.
I think though, like, there are different ways they can play with it too. Like, even just in the level of card design. Like, Objection is one we talked about, came up in the chat as well. And I'll have the hot take and say I think Objection was a pretty good, healthy form of interaction. It creates interesting game states, leads to situations where you have to decide, is it worth risking the objection or trying to play off curve to bait it out? But the problem with Objection is not Objection itself, but the fact that there are strategies that, once again, are not resilient. If you're playing a Sith Mage, a deck that does not have a lot of minions, and all of your minions are crucial to the strategy, Objection just destroys you. You can't play around it in any way. And that's a bad feeling. Like, but...
Well, if you want to talk specifically about Objection, I think one of the biggest problems with Objection was Perjury for Rogue. Because you wouldn't face a whole lot of mages that would play Objection and then Objection again as like main deck cards that you're like, okay, they're doing this for 3 mana and this is something that I can need to like structure my strategy around. No, Rogue would be discovering multiple copies of Objection or finding it out of nowhere and then replaying it again sometimes with the tests, or playing tests to recast Objection, then bouncing tests so that they could recast Objection again, and so on, to where it became this impossible, invincible strategy because minions are so important in Hearthstone and you only have so many super cheap minions to proc the Objection in order to play your actual good one to where you can like do something relevant on your turn. So Objection got so much hate, but I don't think it was really because of the card itself or the class that it was designed for. It was abuse by other stuff entirely. Right. And if that element hadn't existed at the time that Objection existed, it probably still would have been a card that garnered some hate in the same way that Counterspell did, but not nearly the level of hatred and celebration from a large portion of the player base when it finally did rotate.
Yeah, and like I think that kind of proves the point too, because like Counterspell just does not have that degree of hate. And the reason is because decks have access to plenty of cheap spells, and even if your opponent could recur Counterspell turn after turn after turn after turn, most decks would not care because they're either able to play through it or win with minions. And I think it's sort of that design asymmetry where Blizzard says, all right, a lot of decks either get access to cheap spells or don't need to rely on them, whereas almost every deck relies on minions in some way, and the decks that don't are not fully spell-based for the most part, but they rely on a very, very small number of minions. So could you imagine how frustrating Objection would be if your opponent was a spell mage in the Stormwind era?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely happened before where I've had like an Objection against a full spell strategy, and you're like, well, this sucks.
Well,
literally nothing.
Well, specifically Stormwind, though, where you have no minions in your deck and you're not able to play your quest reward because Objection is up, and that's your only way to clear it.
I get what you're saying now. Yeah.
So, you know, like, I think that it just sort of is this case where, you know, we don't have this quantity of minions available to fight through things. And, you know, maybe we can get Objection back if we get more competitively statted cards like Ram Wrangler or miniaturized ones that are giving us cheap minions that we can play and, you know, sort of have that interaction. Because, yeah,
doesn't that also create like just a different problem with the card itself, to where maybe the point is it just isn't worth having that card exist? Because if there is some kind of critical mass of cards that generate cheap cards or minis or whatnot to play around Objection to the point that it's not really effective, then nobody runs Objection because it sucks now. Because the only reason you would play it or choose it off a Discover or do anything like that is because it's too good. So it's either too good or it's too bad.
Or it's just right. And, you know, the game designers got to find their Goldilocks test all the porrages and see which one works. And
There
if
you
it
go.
were easy and there were a clear answer, they would have just done the thing.
Yeah.
And I think the easy answer is not test the waters with objection again for a while because it's divisive. But
Right.
you can see how the conversation goes, though. And it's not just as simple as counter bad. The context really matters. And, I think that they're going to try to keep working, testing different things out, and seeing which form of it is the one that the player base likes best moving forward.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before as well in terms of like perceptions, right? And it's like if the perception of the most vocal players is X card is overpowered, needs a nerf, and that gets changed, maybe that's actually not really the case. It's just the perception of like the most vocal or, whatever it is. I feel like in terms of like this conversation about like counters and like being able to interact or not with that or how you play around it, I feel like Okani was a really good card, like really well balanced card of how you could potentially try to stop what your opponent is doing, but they had an opportunity to interact with it. So for those who don't know, Okani was a minion that you would play on the board and had a battle cry that you got to pick if it would like stop your opponent's next minion, or you could pick if it stopped your opponent's next spell. But then because it's a minion on the board, your opponent could kill it before playing any cards, and then the effect would just be gone, right? So there was definitely like some strategy there, but for me, like that's one that comes to mind where it's like it kind of towed the line of being a counter, but also being something that the opponent could interact with and try to decide. And I think sometimes like the secrets can kind of be that way as well, right? They kind of tried to design them in a way that secrets, interact with different things so that maybe you're going to be able to play around it. Maybe you don't. You have to alter your choices. But yeah, as we've talked about, it's like there's so many different players and everybody likes certain things or doesn't like certain things, whether you're talking about an aggro player being frustrated because they can't, that class just gains a bunch of armor, just heals, and then now my deck just loses. That sucks. Or you're talking about the other side where control's like, well, now they just build up this stuff and I can't do anything even if I remove because they just have repetitive boards, right? So it's the balancing act of all the perceptions of all the players, and that really does matter on how they do this too.
Yeah, and secrets have changed so much too. I think they're like one of the most interesting card types and how different they are now from they were in the past. Because if my memory serves, the secrets originally were things that were intended at least to be slightly undercosted for what they did, but be conditional and rely on your opponent doing the thing to activate them. And nowadays, secrets are things that are slightly undercosted for what they do, but they happen on your opponent's turn, which is sometimes good. So, secrets like Hidden Meaning and then the new Hunter secret from from the new mini set.
Yeah,
those cards.
I've said it before. That new secret, by the way, I think it might be the best Hunter secret ever printed. The one in the mini set.
I think it's comparably good with Hidden Meaning. So yeah, it's real strong.
Well, I also thought Hidden Meaning was the best Hunter secret ever printed when I saw it. So yes, I agree. Yeah. Comparable with Hidden Meaning.
Yeah, it's just more or less an unconditional draw to that your opponent has a little say over what you draw, but they're not likely to bother playing around it because they can't really afford to.
Well, it's literally impossible, right? Like,
okay. Like, here's the hypothetical, right?
What are the things that aren't spell, minion, or weapon that you could play?
Location. But
location, right? Okay.
But
play location and pass. You don't draw anything.
But like for a serious answer, if you have a deck that hypothetically, these don't exist anymore. But say your deck is built around Harpoon Gun or Wild Seeds. You might try to play your turn differently based on which high win rate card on curve you don't want your opponent to have. And that's the extent that it can go. And your deck probably can't even do that in the first place because that's not really how Hearthstone decks are built. But
I mean, generally most decks aren't like revolving around lots of weapons, and there are plenty of classes that just don't have access to any weapons at all. So the weapon part is probably the least likely to stop, which means that'd be the least likely thing to prevent if the deck was built around like weapons. But to your point, it is a good point that if you want them to not draw a minion or not draw a spell, that would be the thing that you would try to play first, obviously, to block that respective thing. So there's like a tiny element of counterplay, but hardly anything as far as how you can play around it. And that's what makes those types of like secrets or effects that are often bad actually good / playable when it's impossible to actually play around it, which creates some frustration just inherently from the other side. I can't do anything. I can't stop them from getting this benefit.
Yeah. And I honestly don't think it's all that. I think like what's funny is that if they didn't make it a secret and just made it like one of those static effects like Wildpaw Cavern or an Aura, I feel like people would mind it much less and would not be upset at all. And I think it's more sort of this expectation settings with secrets that we've had over the last decade, where these are meant to be some sort of pseudo interaction. And now when they kind of aren't, because they want them to be competitive, get played, and fit in modern Hearthstone, it just sort of makes for this jarring moment where you're like, oh, no, that's not fair. But if they played it like that and you're like, oh, okay, cool, they're going to draw 2. Sure. All right. Lots of cards have 2 mana. Classes have 2 mana, draw 2. Like it would just not at all hit in the same way. And
I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum because it also relates to a conversation around like tech cards, right? When it comes to interactions, interruptions and such, where it's like for a long time in Hearthstone, prior to the existence of Rustrot Viper, Acidic Swamp Ooze was not a very good card. But it was a card that would often see play because you might need to destroy your opponent's weapon. But it would create so much frustration from both sides, where it's like, I can't play my Swamp Ooze. I'm holding it. I just have to wait until they play that weapon. When are they going to find that weapon and play it so I can break it? And the other person's like, as soon as I play my weapon, they broke it with the ooze. This sucks. Like, so each side is getting annoyed throughout like the majority of the game for the existence of the card. And a lot of times the card itself, the disruption card, the tech card, whatever it is objectively bad in almost every scenario, except the specific niche scenario where it's ridiculously good. And that's the type of gameplay experience that can create a lot of frustration for people. I saw Tito in the chat talking about how this is why people hate Reno, because there's no way to counter hero cards. I would argue that's not really correct, because if there is a way to counter hero cards, then people are really going to have a bad time, because all of a sudden, well, I played my Reno, but they played their hero counter. Which sucks, by the way, in every single other game ever to put in my deck whenever I'm facing a non-Reno deck or something. Like, so then you have, well, okay, I run into the one psycho who runs the anti-Reno, really? And the Reno player's having a bad time, and then the other player's having a bad time because they're running this terrible card, and they're like, why is it in my deck? Like, it's just bad. It in the same way that like the location destroyer card is bad. Like, locations are cool. That's a fun, interesting effect. So Hearthstone's like, well, we should probably have some kind of counterplay, right? So we have a card now that can destroy a location, but nobody ever plays that card because it's garbage. But
because it's
there's
not
going to be
standard.
well, When it was. Is it not standard anymore or whatever?
No.
Who even knows these things? It didn't say any play in standard. The point remains that like nobody would ever play it because it sucked way too much, except for that one psycho on ladder who's running it. The one instance where somebody really needs that location, and then this person is like, yes, it's my time to shine. I bet they had a blast in that one game where they destroyed that one location. And the person on the other side is like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm the unluckiest player alive. Some lunatic ran the worst card ever and it disrupted my game plan in the best possible way to ruin my experience. Like, I don't know, man. That's a rough situation to be in, to just have this kind of back and forth between like, here's the cool card and here's the counter, but the counter is usually bad because it only is good in the instance that it's ruining someone's fun. And when it isn't ruining someone else's fun, it's ruining your fun for running it because you don't get to ruin someone else's fun. Oof.
Yeah. So, and that part of that is too, the nature of counters in Hearthstone are binary. They do nothing or do something amazing, like you said. Yes. And, in the past, like I know that not everyone saw it this way, but, like plagues are kind of the soft counter to Reno, and with Helya became the very hard counter since there's no steam cleaner, as Chad has pointed out. But, I think that having more sort of incremental counters, or ones that do something that's not all or nothing and have an effect that has some general use but is particularly good against the thing that they target, is the way they go. How should designers get there? That's a tough question, but something like plagues to turn off Reno's duplicate when that was a thing is pretty good, especially when it's not permanent. And, Helya can be super frustrating, and that's understandable because, it sucks if you're the Reno player and can't clear out those plagues. But, if you're looking at the situation being like, all right, I got to dig through my deck, get those duplicate plagues out, and then I'm back online. How do I do it? That's a more engaging situation that people can solve. So, like maybe if they made it something like, like you take Ooze is like the rough tech, Glacial Shard is like the more healthy acidic swamp ooze in my mind, where freeze a character has some versatility. You can stop an opponent from doing their weapon swing, delaying a turn for a card like Umpire's Grasp, but you can also use it to fight for the board. Freeze a minion. It is a 1-mana 2/1, and those are not the worst in Hearthstone, especially with a beneficial effect. And maybe steering design more toward cards like that rather than hard counters with tradable could be another viable way to take it.
So let's start to wrap up this conversation. And I think this all kind of leads to how much level of interaction, how much level of back and forth do people like? Does it allow for stuff? And that comes down to all of the different designs, right? So which system is our favorite type of design for the card games that we talked about, right? The which, I don't want to say level of system, but which system that that different card games use is our favorite. Ron, let's start with you.
I mean, I'd be hard pressed to say something is my favorite other than Hearthstone. I only really have Hearthstone experience, and it's a game I've been playing for a very long time, and I love the way that the game is. I obviously have my problems with different elements of it, but I'd probably have to stick with that. But I just want to amend the answer a little bit to say that I don't have any experience playing Star Wars Unlimited, but I am the most impressed by that concept. And I think maybe if I were to play it, it could become my favorite. It's at least the one that I that I respect the most as far as how they approach it. So, between those two, as far as a style, is what I'd go with.
Okay. Dankest?
So I can say for me, it's definitely the initiative system in Star Wars, Runeterra, and Artifact that has been the one I've enjoyed. But I will say it's sort of like food in the sense that it's not strictly better. And each system will present different challenges. And sometimes I'm in the mood for one over the other. And, it's different ways to kind of exercise your brain and engage. And I also enjoy the others and other variations that aren't quite on this list.
Yeah. I think for me as well, like, I also have really enjoyed the Star Wars Unlimited system and the initiative system, kind of how that works. I think I also really like, kind of like you said, Dankest, like how it exercises your brain of having to really think through the order of what you're doing things in, because your opponent is going to now have their next action, and it's really that back and forth. But I also feel like that can be very frustrating, because it feels like if you make a mistake, it can snowball all of it. It's like, oh shoot, I should have done that other thing first, and then if that had happened, it would cause this, and then that, and then the next thing, they wouldn't have been able to kill this thing off. And in that term, it feels like it can be very punishing that way. So it's, maybe not the most fun if you're trying to do like a very specific thing with a deck, which then, yeah, it's like, oh, but you can do that kind of thing more with something like Hearthstone or Lorcana, or even Pokemon, right? Like, you've heard those stories of like, oh, cool, they they played 20 cards in one turn and cycled a bunch of stuff from their deck and did all this stuff. And so yeah, it's really interesting. But I think personally I have enjoyed the Star Wars Unlimited system so far.
Nice.
Right.
And
any closing thoughts?
None other, but thank you guys for talking this one through. Always fun on Friday, and also, thank you to Tito and Capua for giving us a little more food for thought and engaging in the chat. That always makes the show more fun.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Absolutely.
we do record this live streaming. So it is awesome to actually have people hanging out in chat and giving their opinions. And a lot of these things that we talk about, a lot of the topics are kind of this more expectations, perceptions, player base, what people like and don't like. And, we are only a very small fraction of the player bases of these card games. So the more people that we get in these conversations and giving their input, I think the better our discussions end up being as well. So we always appreciate that, people hanging out and chatting. But yes, let's wind down for this week as we close it out. That was a good one. So let's get into this. Thank you for joining us, everybody, this week. And if you or someone would be interested in joining us, or you have someone in mind that you would love to see on the show, please reach out to us. Let us know. You can send us an email at tccgroundtable@protonmail.com. You can go follow us on Twitter at TCCG Roundtable. Message us there, whether it's a typical tweet, you can direct message us, just reach out to us on Twitter. And speaking of Twitter, when you're there, check out the top pinned tweet to find information on joining into our Discord. And we would love to have more people doing some conversations in the Discord. As always, jump in there, join us, and get reminded of when we're going live there as well. But, if you want to come join us while we're live, then join us over on youtube.com, dragonrider TCCG. I do also stream it live on my Twitch as well as YouTube. But, if you don't catch it live, the VOD will always be up on my YouTube channel, so you can find it there. And if you don't want to watch the VODs, or you just prefer listening to podcasts, or it just works better for you, you can absolutely find the show on audio podcast listeners as well. And if you are into physical card games, please help us out. Use our Inked Gaming affiliate link that you can find in the show notes or in the YouTube description, and get some sweet play mats or dice or sleeves, something, because those are cool, and we want to see some cool stuff. So use that Inked Gaming affiliate link, get yourself some cool stuff, and then hop on over to Twitter or jump in our Discord and share what you got with us. Yeah. I like that. I think that's great. So thank you, as always, for joining in our conversation. And you know what? We all do some cool individual things too, besides when we come together on Fridays to chat together. So let's start with Dankest. Dankest, where can people find more from you individually?
You can find me on Twitter at DadDankest, YouTube and Twitch as DankestDad TCG, and on Discord as DankestDad. So yeah, check out the stuff. I'm psyched to be here every week too. So watch next week. I'm here there.
You're here there. I love it.
Yes.
It's the here there. I'm here there. This is going to be the new today soon. All right.
I like it.
Well, Ron, where can people find you here there?
So you can find me on Twitter at Ron_HS, and you can find me streaming on Twitch every weekday, Monday through Friday, right around 7 p.m. Eastern. So of course I will be live tonight as I usually am, and just off on weekends. What about you, DragonRider?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at DawnieDK, DAWNIEDK. You can find me, as I mentioned already, Twitch and YouTube, dragonrider TCCG. And if you do like Hearthstone, you can hear me chatting all about standard Hearthstone over at the Dr. 3HS podcast. Very exciting coming up. A week from today, we'll be releasing our episode 250, which we will be having a super awesome episode. So stay tuned for that. But as always, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you at the roundtable.